The glint of the streetlight caught the cold, hard steel of the service weapon. It wasn't pointed at a dangerous criminal, not at a threat to public safety. It was pointed at the face of a terrified black woman, her hands trembling as they reached for the sky. Her crime? Driving a luxury car while wearing her own skin, the officer's voice was a low, vicious snarl, cutting through the humid night air. One wrong move, he hissed. Just one. I dare you. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear alone, but from a deep, searing humiliation. This was a ritual she knew too well, a script written in the blood and trauma of generations. Her mind raced, a frantic prayer on a loop. But beneath the terror, a slow, simmering anger began to boil. This was wrong. This was so profoundly wrong. She tried to speak, her voice a fragile thing. Officer, my license and registration are in my shut your mouth, he barked, taking a step closer, the barrel of the gun never wavering. I didn't ask you to speak. I ask, you answer. Understood, she nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. In the glove compartment, just inches from his aggressive grasp, lay a small, leather-bound wallet. Inside it was not just her driver's license, but another form of identification. An identity he was about to mock, to ridicule, to use as further proof of her audacity. He laughed, a cruel, grating sound. FBI? You? That's a good one. Real cute. He thought it was a prop, a desperate lie from a woman caught in a lie. He had no idea that his entire world, his badge, his authority, his fragile ego, were about to shatter into a million pieces in the span of a single, life-altering phone call. The clock was ticking. And in exactly 2 minutes, the hunter would become the prey. Her name was Dr. Lena Wright. The doctor wasn't honorary, it was earned through 7 years of grueling study in forensic psychology, a field where she learned to dissect the human mind, to understand the roots of fear, aggression, and prejudice. The FBI badge wasn't a costume, it was a testament to her dedication to justice, a shield she carried to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Tonight, she was just Lena. Tired. It was past 10 p.m., and the glow of the city lights was a blur against her weary eyes. She had just concluded a marathon 14-hour day at the regional field office, piecing together the psychological profile of a serial arsonist. All she wanted was the comfort of her own home, the soft embrace of her couch, and the mindless hum of her television. She drove a black Audi, a gift to herself after a decade of student loans and government salaries. It was her sanctuary. The leather seats hugged her tired body, the quiet purr of the engine was a soothing melody, and the playlist of smooth jazz was a balm to her overworked mind. She was meticulous about her car, and even more so about her driving. She knew the statistics. She knew the stories. She knew the unspoken rules of being a black woman on the road, hands at 10 and 2, no sudden movements, obey every law to the letter. Her father's voice, etched into her memory from the day she got her license, echoed in her head, * baby girl, you have to be perfect. They only need an excuse. The neighborhood she was driving through, Oakcrest Heights, was affluent and predominantly white. Her own home was just a few blocks away. She belonged here. She paid the taxes, she tended her garden, she waved to her neighbors. But in the dark, behind the wheel of her nice car, she was an anomaly. A problem to be solved. The flash of red and blue in her rearview mirror was like a bucket of ice water thrown on her soul. Her heart didn't just skip a beat, it plummeted into her stomach, a lead weight of dread. She hadn't been speeding. She'd used her signal. Her tags were current. She ran through a mental checklist, her training battling her innate fear. * breathe, Lena. Just be calm. Be polite. It's a routine stop. She pulled over smoothly, under the glow of a bright streetlight, a public place. Another rule. She rolled down her window, placed her hands on the top of the steering wheel where they could be seen, and waited. The wait was agonizing. She could see the officer in her side mirror, sitting in his cruiser, running her plates. She knew what he was seeing, a clean record, no warrants, a registered vehicle. There was no reason for this stop to continue. And yet, the minutes ticked by. Finally, his door opened. He was a large man, his utility belt weighed down with tools of his trade. His posture was not one of cautious procedure, but of swaggering authority. He approached her window slowly, his flashlight beam not just illuminating her interior, but violating it, sweeping across her seats, her purse, her body, with an intrusive glared license and registration. He said, his voice devoid of warmth. It was a command, not a request. Of course, officer, Lena said, her voice carefully neutral, devoid of any emotion that could be misconstrued as defiance. My registration is in the glove compartment. May I reach for it? He didn't answer. He just shone the light directly into her eyes, forcing her to look away. The first hint. The first tiny fracture in the facade of a routine traffic stop. It was a power play, a small one, designed to unsettle her. And it worked. A cold trickle of fear, the ancient fear of her ancestors, began to flow through her veins. This was not going to be routine. This was the beginning of a nightmare she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. Lena moved with painstaking slowness, her every muscle tense. She opened the glove compartment, retrieved the documents, and handed them to the officer, her hand trembling slightly. He snatched them without a word, his flashlight beam still pinned on her. He steadied her license, then looked at her, then back at the license. The silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. This your current address? He asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Yes, officer. It is. Oakcrest Heights, he stated, as if reading a foreign phrase. You live there? Yes, sir. For 3 years now. She kept her answers short, precise. Asterisk yes, sir. No, sir. He grunted, a noncommittal sound that conveyed more disbelief than words ever could. He walked back to his cruiser, taking her documents with him. Lena watched him in her mirror, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw him get on his radio. Another long agonizing wait. She was being investigated for the crime of existing in a space he had decided she didn't belong in. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Cars drove by, their occupants slowing down to stare at the black woman in the nice car being held by the police. The heat of shame joined the chill of fear. This was a public spectacle, a humiliation designed to remind her of her place. Finally, he returned. But he didn't hand back her documents. He stood by her window, his frame blocking the light. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. The words were a physical blow. Excuse me? Officer, is there a problem? I said, step out of the vehicle. Now. The command was sharp, final. This was no longer a traffic stop. This was an escalation. Every cell in her body screamed in protest. Her training screamed louder, asterisk comply. Survive, asterisk with a deep, shuddering breath, she turned off the car, placed the keys on the dash, and opened the door. The night air felt different now, hostile. He directed her to stand in the glare of his headlights. Place your hands on the hood of your vehicle. Spread your feet. She was being detained. Pat down. For a traffic stop with no violation. The rough asphalt bit into her palms. She could feel the eyes of the world upon her. The jazz music from her car had long since stopped, replaced by the frantic rhythm of her own pulse thundering in her ears. He began to pat down, his hands impersonal and rough. This was a violation, a calculated act of dominance. He was establishing control, reminding her that in this dynamic, she was nothing. She was property to be inspected. Officer, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I haven't done anything wrong. I was just going home. Home, he repeated, a cynical laugh in his voice. We'll see about that. You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for. It was a classic, flimsy pretext. The oldest one in the book. The description was undoubtedly just her skin color. The humiliation was complete. She was being treated like a common criminal, her accomplishments, her doctorate, her career, her home, all erased by the color of her skin. The systemic racism she studied, that she fought against in courtrooms and conference rooms, was now pinning her against her own car, its knee on her metaphorical neck. It was then that he found it. During the pat-down, his fingers brushed against the small, hard object in her blazer's inner pocket. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with a new, aggressive curiosity. "It's my identification," Lena said, her face still turned toward the cold hood of her car. He reached in and pulled out the small, leather-bound wallet. He flipped it open. There, next to her photo, was her FBI credentials and badge. The gold shield gleamed under his flashlight. For a moment, there was silence. Lena dared to feel a flicker of hope. This would end it. He would see his mistake, be embarrassed, maybe even apologize. The nightmare would be over, but the sound that broke the silence wasn't an apology. It was laughter. A deep, belly-rolling laugh of pure, unadulterated contempt. He held up her badge like it was a toy from a cereal bowl. "FBI," he roared, stepping back so he could look at her, his face a mask of cruel amusement. "You? Oh, that's rich. That is really something. You think a fake badge is gonna get you out of this? You're in even bigger trouble now, sweetheart." The hope curdled into something dark and dangerous in her chest. He wasn't just disrespecting her, he was disrespecting the entire institution she had sworn to uphold. Her fear began to transform, melting in the white-hot furnace of her rage. This man was not just a bad apple, he was a symptom of the disease. He believed so utterly in his own impunity and the infallibility of his prejudice that he couldn't even conceive that a black woman could hold a position of authority over him. He tossed her credential wallet onto the driver's seat like it was garbage. The insult was profound. And in that moment, Officer Ben Miller signed his own professional death warrant. He had just mocked the wrong woman on the worst day of his life. The climax of his power trip was the precise beginning of his downfall. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a new, more volatile aggression. The discovery of the badge hadn't diffused the situation, it had escalated it in his mind. He now saw her not just as a black woman out of place, but as a challenge to his authority, a liar who needed to be broken. His hand went to his holster. The sound of the strap unsnapping was deafeningly loud in the tense silence. In one fluid, terrifying motion, he drew his service weapon and leveled it at her. On the ground. Now. Face down. "Hands behind your head," he screamed, his voice cracking with a frenzy that was unprofessional, unstable, and utterly terrifying. The world narrowed to the dark eye of the gun barrel. Lena's training evaporated, replaced by primal, animalistic fear. She complied, lowering herself onto the rough, dirty pavement. The grit pressed into her cheek. She interlocked her fingers behind her head, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. This was it. This was how it happened. This was how a traffic stop turned into a headline. Her parents would identify her body. Her colleagues would mourn her. And he would get paid administrative leave. Tears of pure terror and utter helplessness streamed down her face, mixing with the dirt on the asphalt. She could hear him calling for backup on his shoulder radio, his voice frantic. "Unit 7 Adam 12, I have a non-compliant suspect, possible impersonation of a federal officer, requesting immediate backup." He was lying. Creating a narrative. Building a paper trail to justify the unjustifiable. He was constructing his defense while he had her at gunpoint, but pressed against the cold ground, with the weight of his injustice crushing her, the ember of her anger ignited into a blazing fire. Impersonating a federal officer, the charge was absurd, but it was also a key detail. It meant this was now a federal matter. And that was his fatal mistake. He was standing over her, his gun still drawn, yelling at her to stop resisting when she wasn't moving a muscle. His voice was her only soundtrack. But beneath his yelling, she heard another sound. The faint, electronic chirp of his body-worn camera activating. He'd forgotten it in his adrenaline rush. It was recording everything. His laughter. His contempt. His drawn weapon on a compliant woman. It was now or never. Her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly steady, a calm, clear command that cut through his hysterics. It was the voice she used when negotiating with hostage-takers. "Officer Miller," she said, reading his nameplate. "My credentials are not fake. My name is Dr. Lena Wright, Special Agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My identification number is Sierra Charlie 974. If you have any doubt, which you clearly do, you are legally obligated to confirm my identity. Call your dispatch. Have them run my name and number through the National Crime Information Center. Right. Now. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She issued an order. The authority in her voice was so absolute, so devoid of fear, that it gave him pause. The gun wavered, just slightly. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. He was confused. The script had been flipped. The prey was speaking like the hunter. "Shut up," he muttered, but the conviction was gone from his voice. "Call it in, officer," Lena repeated, her voice hardening into steel. "Or would you prefer I give you the direct line to my supervisory special agent? He's going to be very interested in this body camera footage." The mention of the camera made his eyes dart down to his chest. He saw the tiny red light. He saw that his own actions were being documented. The color drained from his face. The bluster and bravado evaporated, leaving behind a pale, sweating man who was suddenly, terrifyingly aware of the abyss he was staring into. He lowered his weapon, his arm shaking. He keyed his mic, his voice now a shaky whisper. "Dispatch, 7 Adam 12. Requesting a NCIC check on a name." He recited her name and number. The silence that followed was more suspenseful than any standoff. Lena remained on the ground, but her posture had changed. She was no longer a victim pleading for her life. She was a federal agent waiting for a subordinate to confirm her identity. Then, the radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice was different now, strained, formal, and laced with panic. 7 Adam 12. Be advised. NCIC return confirms identity. Subject is listed as active federal agent with the FBI. I repeat, identity confirmed. The words hung in the air. The world stood still. Officer Miller didn't move. He just stood there, his gun hanging limply at his side, his mouth slightly agape. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated horror. The architecture of his prejudice, the unshakable foundation of his superiority, crumbled to dust around him in the span of a single, transmitted sentence, and right on cue, as if summoned by the cosmic irony of it all, 2 new sets of headlights turned onto the street. Not local police cruisers. These were black, unmarked SUVs with dark-tinted windows. They screeched to a halt, their doors flying open almost in unison. Men and women in tactical vests emblazoned with FBI poured out. They were her team. They had been monitoring her location as a safety protocol after her late night. They had heard the entire incident over the open mic of Officer Miller's radio, which had been transmitting his hysterics to the entire precinct and, crucially, to the federal wiretap room a few blocks away. The lead agent, a man with a grim, hardened face, walked directly to Officer Miller. He didn't even look at the gun. He looked at the man holding it, a man who was now smaller than he had ever been. "Officer," the FBI agent said, his voice cold and flat. "Holster your weapon." Step away from the agent. It wasn't a request. It was the sound of the system he had abused, turning on him with cold, efficient finality. The cuffs weren't on Lena. They were coming for him. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled, professional chaos. Lena was helped to her feet by a female agent who wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from the adrenaline crash, from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being safe, of being believed. She watched, numb, as the scene unfolded. Officer Miller was disarmed. He was rid his rights, not by one of his brothers in blue who had now arrived on scene and stood watching in stunned, awkward silence, but by a federal agent. The words, "You have the right to remain silent," sounded like a perfect, poetic justice. The steel handcuffs that were clasped around his wrists, not behind his back, a small concession to his former profession, but cuffs nonetheless, clicked shut with a sound that echoed through the night. It was the sound of accountability. He was led to the back of an FBI SUV, his head bowed, his career, his reputation, his freedom, evaporating before him. He was charged with unlawful imprisonment, assault under color of authority, and violation of federal civil rights. The body camera footage, which showed his sneering laughter and the drawn weapon, was the star witness. There would be no plea deal. The system, when it truly worked, could be merciless. Lena gave her statement on the spot, her voice steady, her facts clear, her professional training compartmentalizing the trauma just enough to get through it. She looked at the faces of the local cops who had gathered. Some avoided her gaze, ashamed. Others looked at her with a new, wary respect. The dynamic had been permanently altered. They saw the badge now. They really saw it. And they saw the woman behind it. The story made national news. It was a sensation. Not just because of the shocking twist, but because it was a rare, clear-cut example of the worm turning. It was a story about the abuse of power meeting a power greater than itself. It was about a woman who used the very system designed to oppress her to dismantle her oppressor, but for Lena, the victory was bittersweet. Yes, there was justice. But there was no joy. The trauma of having a gun pointed at her, of being forced onto the ground, of being dehumanized, left a deep and lasting scar. She took a leave of absence from the bureau. She saw a therapist, a colleague who specialized in PTSD and law enforcement. She had nightmares. She also became something she never wanted to be, a symbol. She was hailed as a hero by many, but she didn't feel like one. She felt like a survivor. A survivor who knew that her outcome was a miraculous exception, not the rule. She had the training, the credentials, the resources, and the sheer, unbelievable luck of her team monitoring the radio. What about the countless others who didn't? What about Sandra Bland? Months later, Lena Wright sat on a stage, giving a talk at a conference on policing and community relations. She told her story, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. I didn't win that night, she told the rapt audience. A win would imply this was a game. It wasn't. That night, the American justice system simply performed a rare act of self-correction. It caught a catastrophic error before it became a tragedy. But the error itself should never have been made. The virus of racism had infected the code. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze steady and powerful. That officer didn't see an FBI agent. He didn't see a psychologist. He didn't see a homeowner, a taxpayer, a daughter. He saw a black woman in a nice car. And in his world, that was an impossibility that could only be explained by criminality. His prejudice blinded him to reality. It made him laugh at a gold shield. It made him draw his weapon on a compliant woman. It made him handcuff himself with his own ignorance. She leaned into the microphone, her final words landing with the weight of truth. So I ask you, not as an FBI agent, but as a citizen, as a human being, what is the value of my badge if it can only be seen after I've been forced to the ground? What good is a justice system that only works when the victim has a PhD and a federal credential? The real victory won't be when more black women have FBI badges. The real victory will be when a black woman in a nice car is just a woman in a nice car. Going home. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. The system didn't save me that night. My badge didn't save me. What saved me was a fluke, a coincidence of technology and proximity. Until we fix the root, until we cure the sickness that allows an officer to see a gun where there is only a wallet and a threat where there is only a person, then no one is safe. The handcuffs may have gone on one man that night, but the question remains, who and what are we really arresting?